it really puts the UFC in a bind of who else is out there to fight at this fight card in January. Obviously, Volkanovski's out there. Maybe you get a Volkanovski title defense. Maybe you get another Merab title defense as active as he is, but that is a short turnaround.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the MMA Outsiders, episode 124. My name is Zain Bando. He is Anthony Balester. To my right, thanks again for joining us. It is a packed show this week as we're getting closer to the middle portion of August, which means the UFC's end of summer and fall schedule is about to heat up. So we're excited to bring you guys everything related to the world of combat sports today. And on the day we're recording this, it is a very historic day in the world of mixed martial arts in a way that I don't think Anthony nor I saw coming. So we're excited to talk about what that major development is and so much more. We're also going to preview UFC 319. We're going to do a bit of recapping. There's some extra news and notes to follow through on that front. But before we get to everything, very important as we're getting closer to 1,000 subscribers, very, very close. In fact, be sure to like and subscribe to the Empty the Bench podcast network. Very important that you do so. In order to do so, go to youtube.com/ETB network. You can also check out all of our different content across the network on YouTube, as well as listen to this show and every other show, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, and so much more. It'd be very, very much appreciated. If you are watching over on the video side on YouTube, please be sure to add the MMA Outsiders and every other show that you like across the RSS feeds, if you will, to your feeds. That way you don't miss a moment of either this show or any other show, including my show, Bando's Breakdowns, which is going to drop later this week. So stay tuned for episode 56 for those of you who are anticipating that as well. Before we get into anything else, just as a quick reminder, my name is Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for MMA Knockout on Sports Illustrated. MMA Knockout on Sports Illustrated will be on site to cover UFC 319, which means, yes, I will be there for the festivities. At the time that we're recording this, Media Day will have just wrapped up on Wednesday, which means you will see more coverage from the pre-fight press conference on Thursday, the ceremony weigh-ins on Friday, and, of course, the fight on Saturday. More on that in just a little bit, but I just wanted to plug that I will be on site in person for this as UFC 319 takes place in Chicago. And, of course, to my right is Anthony Balester. He's an ETB Sports podcaster. You can find his work over on ETB Sports, Forever Power 5, and, of course, the all-impending and soon-to-be returning football forecast. Anthony, how are you today?
Very good. This is one of the best weeks in UFC. We just got some breaking news, probably the biggest story of the year in UFC, and they happened the same week where we probably got the biggest fight in the UFC this year. So it's a huge week in MMA news and UFC news.
Yeah, for sure. So without any further ado, let's get right into it and let's drop that and let's get right into the breaking news that was, because at the time that we're recording this on Monday, some big breaking news dropped very early Monday morning, and that was that the UFC finally has its new broadcast partner. The UFC will no longer be on ESPN and ESPN Plus properties beginning in 2026, signing a landmark deal with Paramount, who recently just merged with Skydance for a huge, huge lucrative deal, $7.7 billion over the course of 7 years. That's a little over $1 billion a year there. It's a huge deal for one reason, and kind of one reason only, and that is the fact that the UFC is doing away with pay-per-view. Let me say that again. In the United States, the UFC is doing away with pay-per-view, which means literally all you need is Paramount Plus with ads, which is $7.99 a month, or you need Paramount Plus without ads, which is $12.99 a month, and you get access to all 43 UFC events. So the marquee events, the pay-per-view events, as they were formerly known, will now transition over to Paramount Plus. There's also going to be some CBS simulcast factored in there as well. We don't quite know what the scope of that is going to look like. Mark Shapiro is saying all the numbered UFCs. Dana White is going on a completely different trajectory and saying that it's only going to be 3 to 4 major CBS cards a year, with the rest being on Paramount Plus. But the fact of the matter is if you are in the United States, all you need is one of those 2 subscriptions, and you get access to the entire UFC portfolio beginning in January 2026, effectively doing away with pay-per-view, which means this December will be the final formal UFC pay-per-view event in the history of the promotion, and quite frankly, more than likely, assuming something doesn't change in the near future, more than likely the history of MMA. So just very early on, Anthony, what are your thoughts on this deal? Did you see this one coming? And of course, after you give your take, we can go a little deeper and we can talk about just the pros and cons of this, and where we just kind of see the future of the industry going. So I will let you have the floor as we get moving here on what expects to be a packed episode. So have at it.
Yeah, I'm definitely surprised. Out of all the options we thought about, we weren't even really considering CBS and Paramount as a potential partner for the UFC. Obviously, we were speculating that maybe it would be Netflix, but I'm very, very happy about this. I know you said we're going to break down the pros and cons. I really don't see any cons or any negatives about this new deal. I think this is absolutely perfect. I've been, clamoring for a while now, saying that the UFC needs to get rid of the pay-per-view model and needs to have this on a either a streaming site or some sort of subscription to where you can just pay a small monthly fee, and then you can get all the pay-per-views. So I'm glad that we're not going to get any more pay-per-views. We'll still get obviously the really good main events and the really good UFC events that are going to be numbered cards, but now they're going to be on Paramount. And I know that you did state there was some speculation. We don't know exactly how it's going to go, but it seems like, it makes more sense to have selected a couple per year where it's going to be on CBS, because if you do put all the numbered events on CBS, then that's really going to discourage fans from even buying the subscription to begin with. And when they're paying $7.7 billion for this, they're going to have to be some sort of incentive on why fans are going to have to subscribe. So I think it makes complete sense to maybe do your 4 major events. Obviously, you get International Fight Week, usually have the Abu Dhabi card and others. Next year, you'll have the White House card. Maybe do those big 4 events per year on CBS so that all the fans can watch it, and then make all the other pay-per-views for the hardcore MMA fans or the really good dedicated casual fans can watch it as well. So now it allows all the fans to watch the pay-per-views, and it also incentivizes people to subscribe and pay the monthly fee for Paramount Plus. But this is slam dunk for the UFC. Now, instead of having to pay $80 a month, or if there's 2 cards in a month, $160 to watch it, now you just pay your one flat rate of $7.99. So I think this is a no-brainer. Now you won't have pay-per-view buys. So my question is, I wonder how the UFC fighters' pay is going to change, because typically when you have a main event as a pay-per-view card, usually the pay-per-view buys determine how much these championship fighters make in the main event. But now when you go from making, I think it was like $1.5 billion over a 5-year period, now you're going to be making $1.1 billion per year. The fighters got to demand higher pay, and I think we shall see that. So I'm very, very excited. It makes UFC a lot more accessible for every fan out there.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think fighter pay is going to be a very interesting talking point for sure. And it's going to be something that I will certainly do my best to ask as many fighters as possible how they feel about the possibility of just competing on Paramount in the near future. Because for those of you who may be confused and they're like, wait, when is this starting? Just to clarify, that means the remainder of the year, you're still going to get your ESPN and ESPN Plus fights. But as soon as Jan 1 of 26 hits, everything goes over to CBS. And yeah, it's very interesting. I'm just going to give my 2 cents on this too. I think that I'm just going to give you a little history lesson. I think the UFC was ahead of the curve on this years ago. When they launched Fight Pass, that was a huge deal, because before they launched Fight Pass, they would have all these international events that would be shown on tape delay, and Fight Pass allowed the UFC to air a fight from Sweden in time in Sweden, but the American audience would still get to watch it. Then Fight Pass expanded to include the Fight Library, the Ultimate Fighter, various regional promotions, and that sort. Then the UFC really got interested in making every event live. So that was a huge deal. So that was step one. Then step two, after leaving Fox, they signed with a huge rights distributor in ESPN, which I would say made them bigger in the United States because they were on the major four-letter sports network. Obviously, the last few years, it hasn't gone well from a streaming experience standpoint, but now with all of these different technological advances, Netflix getting involved in boxing, more events being streamed on various just streaming platforms, whether that's Rumble or Kick or even YouTube and all of these other places. It was only a matter of time before the pay-per-view model would fully go away. And I think the UFC could not have done that at a better time because I don't know the numbers for sure, but I think I can say with confidence that it's probably one of the more, I guess you could say, highly sought after events that people find other means to watch. And now in the United States, it looks as if that's no longer going to be the case. Unfortunately, though, at least for now, the international rights in various countries, including Canada, are going to remain the same. So for those of you in Canada, you'll still have to pay for them. But in the United States, it's the beginning of probably a whole new, I guess, guinea pig generation where the United States is going to be the guinea pig here. We'll see how the mostly free model works. Obviously it's not 100% free, but again, no need to pay for it twice. And, I think, if you're other promotions and if you're ESPN, you're basically out of the combat sports business. But what is interesting though, is we don't know what's going to happen with the Ultimate Fighter, which we'll get to in a little bit here. We don't know what's going to happen with Dana White Contender Series, which premiered its first episode of its new season 9 yesterday. We don't know what the future of that show is going to look like as and where it's going to be placed at. And then, of course, we don't know where all the UFC's shoulder programming is going to go. Although, Anthony, in my opinion, it would just make sense to move everything over to Paramount Plus. But I know that it's probably not that easy unless Paramount Plus ups its prices. Just overall, though, like, how do you think from an overall standpoint that the viewing experience is going to change? And do you think this will incentivize the UFC to put on bigger cards? And maybe they do the White House one and they say, oh, this is a one-off, and it's going to feel like, they're back on Fox again? Or do you think they'll do some different things for some of these major CBS events, that maybe were not done during the Fox era or even during the Spike era? What do you think?
Yeah, I obviously think Dana White's going to make sure that those 4 major events on CBS is going to be, worth it and be really, really high incentivized for people to tune in, and definitely is going to go overboard to make sure they deliver. But overall, I really don't think the viewer experience is going to change. I mean, typically we've already seen this just in the pay-per-view model way. With the pay-per-view model, you typically obviously, get around the 13, 14 numbered cards. And then you get obviously, around 30, fight night cards that are usually not obviously as good, but we usually get them, every week with the exception of a couple of weeks off. So you usually get around 43 total events. That's exactly what we're getting now. We're going to get 13 13 number card events, and then we're going to get 30 fight night events. And usually, typically, I know the UFC's never came out and said, oh, we're going to have 4 big pay-per-views and the rest of them aren't going to be as good, but typically that's what we got. We usually typically when we look at after the year and we look at what were the best cards, there's usually about 3 to 4 cards that really stand out. It's always International Fight Week. It's always the Abu Dhabi card. And then obviously last year you had the UFC 300. You had the Sphere card. So typically you usually get 3 to 4 major events. Now the UFC without the pay-per-view model is still going to be doing the same. But now we know there's going to be 4 really high marketable and high key pay-per-views or number cards that are going to be much more better to watch and have much bigger fights than the other number cards. So I don't think the viewer ship or the way the UFC is going to plan their cards are going to change much. We're still going to get the same amount of events, and we're still going to have 4 number cards that are going to probably be a lot better than the other ones. So I don't think that changes. The only changes is we get to watch it for $7.99 a month instead of having to pay $80 for each individual pay-per-view card.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, and I guess I can tease it now because I've been keeping this secret for a while. But other countries are already doing this. There are various countries, no specific ones mentioned, where literally their whole Fight Pass subscription, Anthony, I'm not sure if you know this, you literally do what CBS is doing, where you pay one flat fee and you get the entire UFC library included. So now, finally, America is making the switch, which is pretty crazy to think about, given that so many other countries have already done so. So,
yeah, it makes complete sense, and I'm glad you think the USA would have had access to this first, but I'm glad that it's finally coming over to our country now.
yeah, for sure. And I guess before we put a ball on this for now, as this story is still developing, and there's going to be more news to come out of this, I'm sure. What is the perfect UFC paper? Or excuse me, I need to stop calling them pay-per-view events now. What is the perfect marquee UFC event to open the CBS deal? Because I think there are only a few fights that you could do to open the year that would be a wow factor for CBS, and I think you probably know which fights I'm thinking about. But I want to know your pick first, and then I'll give mine, obviously.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting because when you look at the timeline, we're already getting speculation that Islam's going to fight for the 170 belt later this year. We're also getting rumors and speculation that Ilia Topuria's next fight is probably going to be in December. We know Conor McGregor and John Jones want to wait to the White House event. So it's going to be interesting to see who they get for the January card. I would not be surprised if the UFC says, hey, instead of having Islam fight in November or Ilia Topuria fight in December, I feel like we can have one of those fights delayed 1 month or two and have that fight in January, because if Islam fights in November, Ilia fights in December, and obviously you already got Aspinall who's going to be fighting in October, and same with Alex Pereira. And obviously, John Jones and McGregor want to wait until next July. It really puts the UFC in a bind of who else is out there to fight at this fight card in January. Obviously, Volkanovski's out there. Maybe you get a Volkanovski title defense. Maybe you get another Merab title defense, as active as he is, but that is a short turnaround. So it makes you think, what other options do the UFC got? I think the only other option that I could see that would be a high marketable fight is the main event we're talking about tonight for the middleweight belt. I can see whoever wins that fight fighting in a huge middleweight belt, because we got so many exciting contenders at the division that we're going to be talking about. I could potentially see the main event for January, if nothing gets delayed or moved, as the middleweight title bout. And maybe that's the one, if it's a Khamzat and Dricus versus a De Ritter or Hernandez, or the winner of Bohayo and Imavov. I see that as the only option for January, unless if the UFC convinces Islam or Topuria to wait an additional month or two.
Yeah, that's a solid pick. So I'll give mine, and I think this one's going to be pretty controversial. But I think, and I'm just going to go out on a limb, and I could be totally wrong in saying this. I think the Pereira Ankalaev rematch in October is going to be so good, and I think that's how the UFC opens their CBS eras, with the Pereira Ankalaev trilogy fight. That's what I think, and I know it's not the first choice. I know everybody wants to see Ilya versus Islam and whatnot, but they're going to be moving those fights to later in the year. They know that they have a huge White House card coming up. I'm sure they're going to go to Miami again and a couple other places, but you need someone who has that aura and that star power, and I think if Pereira can win the rematch against Ankalaev, I think his star power will be restored, and I actually think it's a perfect way to open the year, given that Pereira is going to be the UFC light heavyweight champion again, and it will be okay. Can he prove in a best of three that he was better than Magomed? I actually think the UFC is willing to take that risk if Pereira wins in October in Las Vegas. So
yeah, I would love that. I mean, Alex Pereira is one of, if not my favorite fighter in the UFC. I really have a tough time stylistically seeing him get past Ankalaev. If he does, that's the perfect fight. I know that would be a quick turnaround for a guy like Ankalaev, who typically doesn't have quick turnarounds, But that's definitely a fight that that definitely could sell. And if Alex Pereira does lose that fight, I do think with the star power that Dricus has and the star power that Khamzat has, I think the winner of that fight could be defending their title as well in the main event against someone like RDR, Hernandez, or Bohai or Imavov. That'd be a very exciting fight as well.
Yeah, that would be very exciting as well, and it would make a whole lot of sense to do that in an international location, which is something the UFC has done in the past. So, who knows? Brazil better be uber prepared, because the last time they went to Brazil to open the year was a pretty good cards. You never know. You might see it. You might see an international UFC event to begin 2026, but you never know. And speaking of middleweight, speaking of Anthony Hernandez, let's go over last weekend's UFC Vegas 109. This was one of 5 finishes on the card. Anthony Hernandez submitting Roman Dolidze in the 4th round at the Apex to solely affirm his status as a top contender at middleweight. And just as a bit of an insider plug here, Anthony Hernandez is being flown out to Chicago, so there's a chance that whoever wins the Plessis Chimaev fight this weekend could easily be facing off with Fluffy if the UFC feels that that's the next fight to sell. But the way he dominated Dolidze was just effortless. His pace was just unreal. It was like a Cain Velasquez style pace, and just the way he was able to overwhelm him, get to the 4th round, and of course submit him was just unreal. And yeah, Herb Dean may have not done the greatest job officiating the fight, but man, I think you could have removed Herb Dean from that fight, and Anthony Hernandez still would have won that fight. And I think this is a huge drop-off for Dolidze. I think he's going to probably take, I would assume, 8-9 months off. He did not look like himself. And this is no disrespect to Marvin Vettori at all, but this goes to show that maybe Marvin Vettori is on the slight bit of a downswing in his career, just given how he's looked in his last couple of fights. But man, Anthony Hernandez is a contender to behold. He's finished 12 out of his last 16 fights. Has won 8 fights in a row now, and definitely looks like a middleweight contender on the rise. In a promotion that is really lacking American champions. And I don't mean to make this a cultural thing, but I do think when you look at past history, the promotion is much stronger when they at least have 2 to 3 American champions that people can really rally behind. And it's clear that Hernandez doesn't really have a filter as to how he feels about stuff. And it's clear that, he's there to go in and just dominate people whatever chance he can. And he did exactly that against Dolidze. Made it look really easy, and it's clear that he wants to stay active. He wants to fight again. He's even interested in maybe, fighting for a BMF if the UFC decides to, do away with the BMF or move it to a different division, similar to what they did years ago, or even make a new BMF just for the middleweight division or something. But it's clear that he is one of the top contenders in the sport, and I think if he does get the next title shot, no one would be disappointed. But the middleweight logjam continues now. That's now De Ridder from a couple weeks ago beating Whitaker, and then now, of course, Hernandez beating Dolidze, and then, of course, more questions will be answered this upcoming weekend when Dricus du Plessis finally fights Khamzat Chimaev, and then, of course, in September in Paris when Nasruddin Imavov, who's come out of nowhere, fights Kyle Bahayo, and Bahayo is the backup this weekend. So there's a lot going on at middleweight. But I think Hernandez did enough to assert himself in that mix for sure. And I'm excited to see where he goes from here. No doubt about it.
Yeah, Anthony Hernandez was absolutely dominant over Roman Dolidze. I mean, dominating him in every aspect, in the grappling department, in the striking department. I mean, he pretty much could have finished him in any round, and he just decided to do it in the 4th, by a choke. So, Anthony Hernandez on this crazy win streak is definitely one of the rising contenders in a very strong, one of the best and deepest divisions in UFC at the 185 middleweight bout. The only thing is I do think he needs one more fight. I think beating Roman Dolidze, a guy who was ranked 9th, just inside the top 10, I don't think that should warrant, a title shot. I think De Ridder getting a win. No, obviously it wasn't as dominant, but getting a win over a guy who was a future former champion in Robert Whitaker, I believe that, gives him more rank over Hernandez and gives him more of a say for the next title shot. And obviously you also got Kyle Bahayo, who's been undefeated in UFC, and Nasruddin Imavov, who has beaten Adesanya and has beaten some really good contenders, and he's the number 1 ranked guy. So I think the winner of Kyle Borralho and Imavov is probably going to end up being the number 1 ranked contender, and I think whoever wins that's more impressive than a guy over Roma Dolidze. So I think what you do is, I think the thing that makes the most logical sense is I think you take, obviously the winner of Dricus and Khamzat. I think you either match them up against RDR or you match them up against the winner of Borralho and Imavov. I think RDR makes the most sense since his fight's going to have a lot longer of a period of time than the Kyle Borralho and Imavov fight, so he's going to have a faster turnaround. And I think you have Anthony Hernandez in a number 1 contenders match against one of those 3 guys. So I think the best way to do it is just have RDR, who's already got the win over Whitaker. I think you have RDR fight the winner in the next title bout against Dricus and Khamzat winner. And then whoever wins between Imavov and Borralho, they have to fight one more fight against Hernandez. But, man, it's really, really tough in this weight class. But I think right now, as it stands, RDR should be next up, and then Borralho or Imavov should be after that. So I think right now you should have, Hernandez fight that second person and let RDR get the next title shot. So I think that makes the most sense, but the UFC can't go wrong. If they do decide to give Hernandez the next title shot, you're going to get a very exciting fight. And all these guys are dominant. All these guys are worthy. So the UFC really can't go wrong in any of these matchmaking.
Yeah, that's definitely well said, and I think the UFC has a lot of options for sure. Let's talk about some other fights in the card. We had some other notable finishes as well. The one that I want to highlight, though, is Elijah Smith. That slam knockout was unbelievable. Luckily, his opponent is okay, but that's one of the nastiest knockouts in recent UFC history, and it's clear that it got Rampage Jackson's attention, as it was very, very similar to a power slam knockout from about over 20-plus years ago. So that was a very exciting fight. Jocelyn Edwards looked very good this past weekend as well. There were some other contenders on this card that just really showed out, and I think it just goes to show that sometimes these Apex cards can be really, really good, and this one happened to be one of them. And I honestly can't say I'm disappointed, just considering that a lot of people were giving this card a hard time, and I actually thought most of this card was a really, really good card. You and I both did really, really well on predictions. Were there any other notable takeaways that you had on this card before we give it a grade and put it to bed and move on to UFC 319?
Yeah, this was definitely a card that surprised a lot of people. I mean, we got back-to-back weeks where it looked like we had a real disappointing, fight night, and we ended up getting a very, very exciting fights, particularly this one with all the, the KOs. Like you said, the best one was Elijah Smith. Slamming his opponent right on the head, and then also getting a couple finishing shots as well. That was pretty vicious. You also had the Edwards knockout, like you said. She's a very tough woman and had a very vicious knockout as well. You got Irios Medic, who had a very impressive knockout as well. And then you also had Leroy Duncan, who got the finish as well. So it was basically TKO after TKO, and it was a very exciting fight.
Yeah, the main card could have been a little bit stronger with the decisions near the end of the show, but overall, it was a solid card. I would actually give this card an 8.1. What about you?
Yeah, you read my mind. I was thinking exactly like an 8.3, 8.1. So I think that's a great grade for the fight night card that we thought we were getting before it started.
Yeah, and just considering how I went 9-3 and you went 10-2 again for this second straight week, I think we're on our UFC mojo lately, and it only means with me saying that we might struggle this weekend. So let's move over to talk about UFC 319. So I kind of teased it a little earlier, but it'll be my 14th UFC live event in person this weekend. The UFC returns to Chicago for the first time since June of 2019. It's been that long. It's probably been the most talked about city or asked about city for the UFC to host an event. So they're finally doing it, except I'll be doing it in a little bit in a different capacity. I'll be taking my fan card off, and I'll be a member of the media. So anything that you see from the pre-fight press conference to the weigh-in to the post-fight press conference, I'll do my best to bring you guys as much as possible, as there's a lot of content to go through this week. So it should be an exciting week from a media standpoint. So stay tuned to all my social medias for all of that. And just given that I've covered a lot of events, or just given that I've been to a lot of events over the years, dating back to the first UFC event that they ever held in Illinois, which was UFC 90 in October of 2008. I think the sport has gotten a whole lot bigger. Obviously, I think UFC 319 is more than likely the biggest card from a main event standpoint that they'll ever bring. And fun fact, Anthony, it's the third middleweight title fight in the history of the UFC to take place in the state. The other two were Robert Whitaker and Yoel Romero, which I was also at. And the other one, of course, was the first ever UFC event that they had in the state of Illinois, which, of course, was Anderson Silva versus Patrick Cote at UFC 90. So overall, even though this might be just a typical card for some people, this one is a little bit important just considering that Chicago hasn't gotten a UFC event in a while, and I think a lot of people are excited, and I'm excited for it, and it'd be a fun time. You have anything else you want to add before we preview some of these fights? Because this card is halfway decent outside of the main event, of course. So,
yeah, there's a lot of great fights, and like we said in previous weeks leading up to it, the main event, Dricus du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev, I think that's the best and biggest fight of the year, and I really can't wait to see it. We've been wanting to see Khamzat on a title shot for a while, and we finally get to see it this weekend.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I guess let's get into it here with the main event. We have du Plessis defending his title once again. This is his first fight back on U.S. soil in a couple of years now, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, it's his third title defense, considering that he did defeat Israel Adesanya and, of course, Sean Strickland, and then, of course, before that, taking the title from Strickland back at UFC 297 in Canada. This will obviously be du Plessis' toughest fight to date. He comes in with a record of 20-2. Khamzat Chimaev, of course, is undefeated. Du Plessis is the betting underdog in this fight, which surprised me, and I'm sure surprised a lot of other people, just given that Khamzat Chimaev has had struggles in the past with inactivity after his very, very hot start in 2020, of course. So let's break down this fight a little bit further if we could. This is one of 13 fights on a stacked card from Chicago this weekend. Of course, it's being hosted at the United Center, which is the home of the Blackhawks and the Bulls. 23-2. My bad. 23-2 versus 14-0. So, of course, a very, very good combined record from both of these guys. As of Monday evening, du Plessis is a plus 170 underdog. The comeback on Chimaev is minus 210. Who of course is unblemished in the UFC, and they have a lot of good wins between them. So let's take a look at du Plessis' resume here as I pull it up. This is courtesy of Tapology, of course. So of course, the South African native, 31 years old. I think he's really just entering his prime now. 9-0 in the UFC overall, and as I said, holds 2 wins over Sean Strickland. Of course, winning the title over Strickland about a little over a year ago or so, and then of course dominating Adesanya in his first title defense, of course winning the rematch, and then now fighting Chimaev. Looking back through some of his other wins, Robert Whitaker, another notable one, Darren Till, Brad Tavares, who was in the UFC for a long time, Trevin Giles, that was a fight that I was at, and of course he opened his UFC run against Marcus Perez, who at the time was a 12-3 budding prospect who unfortunately just didn't work out. So Chimaev, du Plessis, obviously has a really, really nice run attached to him, but I think he's taking on his toughest test in Chimaev, who pretty much took the UFC by storm ever since entering the promotion a little over 5 years ago. He's 8-0 in the UFC, just beat Robert Whitaker in his first fight back in over a year. In a number one contender fight by a face crank in the first round. That was the last outing. Then, of course, you have to go all the way back to 2022. That was the last time that, Chimaev was really active within the sport at large. It's his first fight on U.S. soil since defeating Kevin Holland by Darce choke. That was in September of 2022. A lot of people had questions or were skeptical of him getting a title shot, but you knew Chimaev was going to get a title shot at some point. And with the way he dominated Whitaker, I could see why Chimaev is the favorite. But I guess what is your overall outlook on this fight? Who are you picking, and what do you think of this fight just overall from a stylistic standpoint? Because I think it's fascinating. I think it's someone in Chimaev who's just a pure wrestler who's going to try to do everything he can to get Plessis to the ground. Whereas Plessis, I think the longer the fight goes, the more it favors him, especially when it gets into round 4 and round 5, given that he has more championship experience than Khamzat. So overall, what do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I'm very excited for this fight. I mean, Dricus has looked unbeatable, going through legend after legend. Obviously he beat Robert Whitaker as well. Beat him in a different way by TKO, just by, smothering him and overpowering him with his vicious strikes. I mean, Dricus du Plessis is awkward, but he makes it work. He kind of fights like he's in a bar fight. And, he's basically a guy that you hit him, he's going to hit you twice as hard. And he's going to, be able to withstand the punishment and be able to dish out even more punishment. And eventually the guys he fights usually ends up folding. He beat Whitaker. He beat Strickland. He beat Adesanya. The guy's one of the best in the world. And on Khamzat's side, I mean, this guy's pretty much ran through everybody. Obviously, I know his cardio was in question. He didn't look good at the end of the fight against Kamaru Usman. Obviously, he had the close fight with Gilbert Burns. But finally, after all of these years, I know he had his health issues, but we finally get to see what Khamzat's going to look like, in a title fight. And most of the time, even if he is scheduled for 5 rounds, it doesn't make it to 5 rounds. It usually doesn't even make it to round 2. So I'm finally going to answer all these questions about how was Khamzat going to do in this, in his first title fight, in a 5-round fight against a guy who has great cardio and a guy in Dricus du Plessis who seems to get better with each and every round. Dricus du Plessis does have, decent takedown defense and is a very strong guy. He cuts a lot of weight to make this weight class, so he's a very strong, muscular guy that you can't just easily throw around, and one of the best strikers in the world. But I just think Khamzat is just at a completely different level. And that's saying a lot when you're talking about a guy in Dricus who's a top 5, top 10 pound-for-pound guy. I think Khamzat's got potential to be the number 1 pound-for-pound guy. I think he's the best grappler and the best wrestler in the world. He's super, super strong. He's super, super athletic. And I think now he's got better training. He's in better health. I think we're going to see a better cardio from Khamzat Chimaev. And I just think he's one of the best fighters we've ever seen. I mean, honestly, I really think on planet Earth, there may be only 3 guys that can honestly beat this guy in a fight. I don't think there's anybody at the 170-pound weight class that can beat him. Obviously, there's no one below those weight classes that could touch him. I don't believe there's anybody at middleweight that could beat him. And I think if he was to fight at light heavyweight, I don't think an Alex Pereira or an Ankalaev could beat him. And I even go a stretch further to think maybe only a guy like Francis Ngannou or John Jones or Aspinall heavyweight could beat this guy, because this guy is just so great all around. I think this guy, has the type of talent to be the first ever triple champion title guy. I think he could definitely be a triple champ status guy. And I know he can't make the 170, but if he could, I think he'd beat anybody at 170. I think he's going to win the 185 belt, and I think eventually he wins the 205 belt. So as great as Dricus is, I just think Khamzat is something we haven't seen. And I think Khamzat's going to go in there, and I think he's going to get the submission win over Dricus, who hasn't fought no one near the level, but no one's at the level of Khamzat. So I think as great as Dricus is, one of the best fighters we've ever seen, future Hall of Famer, one of the best middleweights of all time, I think Khamzat's going to make easy work with Dricus, and I think he's going to submit him in the first round.
Wow, that's bold. I have another friend who I'd rather not name. He even went as far to say that he thinks he submits du Plessis in 2 minutes. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's going to be very quickly.
Wow.
It may look real similar to what we just saw with Robert Whitaker. I just think Khamzat is something we've never seen. I think he's a bigger, stronger, more athletic version of Khabib Nurmagomedov with better striking. I mean, this guy Khamzat is taking the UFC by storm, and I think he's going to continue that trajectory this Saturday.
Wow, I'm going to have to strongly disagree with you here. I think there are a lot of factors that will hinder Khamzat from winning this fight, and one of them is simply Dricus' pace. I just think Khamzat just has not had a very similar amount of 5-round experience to where I feel comfortable picking the challenger. And I'm also just going off of some past history too. I mean, as I just alluded to, I've been to the last 2 Chicago events that have had middleweight title fights, and the champion has won both of them. I don't know what it is about Chicago more specifically, but it seems that the champion always rises to the occasion. And I actually think Chimaev wins an absolute classic. I think he's going to trail on the scorecards up to the first 2 rounds. I think he's going to eke out a very, very close, highly competitive decision over Chimaev. Would I be surprised if Chimaev won in 2 minutes? No, but I just feel like there's something about du Plessis when people think that they figured him out, they don't. And I think I just don't think Chimaev has really fought anyone of the level of caliber that du Plessis is. And I think you could say, oh, a lot of people said the same thing about Robert Whittaker, but Robert Whittaker isn't the same guy that he was 5, 6, 7 years ago. Or I think, as I just alluded to, du Plessis is only entering his prime at the moment. So I'm gonna have to disagree with you here. I'm going to say that we're still going to get, and still it's going to be a great fight. Am I fully prepared to be wrong 100%? I just think overall, Chimaev just doesn't have the same championship bandwidth that I think a lot of people think he does, and I think that's going to be the one that costs him the most. But it remains to be seen. That's why they do this, and that's why I think this middleweight title fight has so much heat on it, because people just don't know what to expect from it, and I think that's the most fascinating part about it, for sure. All right, let's move on now to the co-main event. This was thrown together within the last couple of weeks. We got Lerone Murphy taking on Aaron Pico in a very, very interesting fight at 145 pounds. Aaron Pico making his UFC debut. Lerone Murphy has been on a tear ever since he entered the UFC. I think this Aaron Pico signing was long overdue. But I just think, for whatever reason, I think Lerone Murphy is a man on the rise. And every single time you try to think that, oh, Aaron Pico's got it and Aaron Pico's hype is legit, he doesn't look 100%. So I'm going to go lean on the side of Aaron Pico to get it done. And I actually don't even think the fight's really all that close. I actually think he finishes Aaron Pico in the first 10 minutes. I just think Aaron Pico is a shell of who he used to be. And I simply think the UFC signed him too late. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you as well. Not by the same method of victory. I definitely think these are two rising contenders. Both guys, can crack, and both guys can strike and hurt you. I think, of late, Lerone Murphy has been a guy who hasn't really been TKOing people. He's been more of a guy who's just been the more efficient boxer, kind of like what we've seen with when Max Holloway fight Dustin Poirier, where he's just so accurate and just has so much high volume that he ends up winning by decision. And I think Aaron Pico is the guy who might have slightly more power and can KO people. And I think he'll have his moments where he does hurt Lerone Murphy. But I think Murphy, who's been undefeated in the UFC, one of the top rising contenders in the featherweight division, I think he continues that. And I think it's a tough ask for Aaron Pico in his debut to fight a guy as skilled as Lerone Murphy. So I'm going to go Lerone Murphy as well to win. But I think he's going to win by decision the same way he's been winning his other fights as well.
Yeah, very, very well said there. Let's move on to this next one. Both of these guys have said it's going to be guaranteed violence. Geoff Neal taking on Carlos Prates. And I think this fight is a chance to have fight of the night written all over. But I actually think this is bounce back season for Carlos Prates. He gets a late stoppage over Geoff Neal in either the late second round, early third round. I just expect this fight to be a firefight from the second the fight starts until it ends. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Zain. He took the words right out of my mouth. I was definitely going to say I think both these guys, could brawl. Might get a fight of the night here. Both these guys could win this fight any moment by TKO or KO. So we're going to get a very, very sick, entertaining finish. I think Prates at this time is a little bit better, a little bit more skilled at this time. He definitely needs a rebound fight as well after the loss to Ian Gary. So I think we're going to see a very hungry Carlos Prates, who suffered, one of his few his only loss in UFC against Ian Gary. So I think we're going to see him rebound, and I'm going to go Carlos Prates to win by TKO as well.
Yeah, and then another interesting middleweight fight where the winner of this fight could find themselves in the title picture as well. Jared Cannonier taking on Michael Venom Page. It's the striker versus the guy who can do everything, who can outwit. That's the other, and I just think that Jared Cannonier has way too much UFC experience for me to run the risk of taking Michael Venom Page. To me, he just simply has not had that highweight moment that the UFC expected him to have when they signed him about a year and a half or so ago. I just think Jared Cannonier is on a different level, especially after that win against Gregor Rodriguez. And to me, I just haven't seen enough from Michael Page. So I'm going to go Jared Cannonier to win conservatively by decision. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, both these guys are two great strikers, but different styles. Obviously, Cannonier is the bigger, stronger fighter who has that one-punch KO power. Venom Page has that karate style where he likes the counter punches. And I think this is a very interesting match. This was probably the toughest one I had to pick because I could definitely see with Cannonier being the slower fighter having a tough time catching Michael Venom Page. Who's a very tough guy to catch. I mean, we've seen a lot of other skilled strikers like Charles Bullet and others who couldn't really catch him or hit him. But I think Cannonier, like you said, being the more experienced fighter, having such a pedigree, who's been one of the top contenders in the UFC for a long time. I also think he'll have the grappling advantage because he's the stronger fighter. So I think if he has a tough time in this fight trying to connect with Michael Venom Page, I think he'll try to get this fight to the ground and try to get the control time as well. And I do think, at some point in the 3 rounds, I do think he's going to catch Michael Venom Page with one of those big shots. I just don't think he'll probably be able to get the TKO finish because Venom Page is a tough guy to finish. So I agree. I'm going to go Jaron Cannonier by decision.
Okay, and then finally, a couple more fights to go through before we move on. One of them is Tim Elliott versus Kai Asakura. Tim Elliott makes his return to MMA, whereas Kai Asakura is looking to bounce back from his title fight defeat against Alexandre Pantoja in his UFC debut. I think Asakura does enough to get it done to save his job. I just think Tim Elliott's layoff is going to be too much. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Elliott's had a long layoff. Obviously, he's a good grappler, but Kai Asakura is a really good defensive wrestler, so I think he'll be able to negate that. I think he has a lot of really good knees and a lot of good kicks, and he could strike as well, too. And I just think at this point, yeah, he lost to Pantoja, but Pantoja beats everybody at the flyweight division, so I think he's going to respond as well, get back on track, continue to move up those rankings, maybe get another shot in the future, but continue to be an ascending, contender. So I'm going to go Kai Asakura the win by TKO.
Well, moving on to the last fight we're going to preview on this card before looking at this card from a general sense before we wrap up and move on. We have one of the Ultimate Fighter finale fights determined. The other one at the time that we're recording this, the last episode of the Ultimate Fighter, Cormier and Sonnen is yet to air. So we just figured that we would preview the one that's currently public. It is Idiris versus Joseph Morales in the Ultimate Fighter finale flyweight fight here. I just think Morales is trying to get back to the UFC for a reason. He knows that he kind of got at the short end of the stick, given that he only had a couple fights and given that one of them was against a future champion at the time. And I just feel like he's back. He's reinvigorated. He's looked really good on the show. And it's not to take anything away from his opponent because his opponent's good. He's beaten some guys on the regional scene. But I just think UFC experience means something. And that's something that Morales has versus the fact that Idiris doesn't. And I think it'll be a deciding factor. So give me Morales to win the Ultimate Fighter flyweight finale by decision in a very entertaining fight. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think Morales is due for a bounce back. So I'm going to agree with you. I think Joseph Morales gets this win by decision.
Well, listen, then are there any other UFC 319 fights that caught your eye, just given that this card is really, really deep?
Yeah, I think the one fight that stands out is two guys who are just outside the top 15 in the rankings. That's Rusabiev versus Brian Battle. Rusabiev has been a great fighter in the middleweight division. He's very long. He's one of the tallest middleweight fighters. I know when he's fought at 170, I think that's too much of a weight cut, and that's why he starts to struggle. I think at middleweight, he's been pretty dominant, and Brian Battle's been pretty good of late too. So I think the winner of this fight probably gets a ranked matchup, maybe as a main event, as a fight night in the future. So this has really big implications in the middleweight division. So I'm real excited to see that fight.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for a UFC 319 preview. But before we move into preview PFL, we just wanted to take a quick time out to get a quick word from our friends over at Playback, and we will be right back to wrap up the show. All right, just wanted to do a quick time out in the middle of the show to remind you guys that the MMA Outsiders is presented by Playback. And I teased that there was something a little bit earlier in the show, but now without further ado, here we go. Presented by Playback, watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. You won't regret it. All right, so that was a message from our friends over at Playback. We're now going to move on to the end of the show and quickly go through the next leg of the PFL finals, of course. So this next leg takes the promotion to Charlotte, North Carolina. We have 3 championship fights on this card, starting with the PFL Lightweight Championship, Gadzhi Rabadanov versus Alfie Davis. To me, I just feel like PFL Championship experience is one thing that I think a lot of people overlook, and I think that I think that Gadzhi Rabadanov is due for a very, very dominant performance, and I think he's just catching Alfie Davis at the right time. So I'm going to say that Rabadanov wins this one by unanimous decision. What do you think?
Yeah, I just think, Rabadanov is way too much of a talented fighter. I think he's levels above Alfie Davis. So I think he gets this win. But I'm going to go by finish. I think he's going to get this win by finish over Alfie Davis and then reclaim the 155 championship PFL belt and win the tournament again.
Well, so then moving on to the second of 3 title fights, the PFL Bantamweight Championship sees Alves versus Wetzel, and then of course, obviously Alves has been in spots like this before. Justin Welch, who's always been overlooked, but personally, Alves is someone to behold, and I think is dominant everywhere. I actually do think that Justin Welch springs this upset and knocks him out, though. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be a tremendous upset. I'm going to go with Marcelli. But I wouldn't be surprised if Wetzel gets the win as well. This is a fight that I think will be much closer than the previous matchup in the PFL we spoke about. But I guess we're going to have different opinions on this one. I'm going to go with Marcelli to get this win by decision.
Yeah, and then speaking of experience in the PFL Women's Flyweight Championship, it seems that she's always in the spot. Liz Carmouche is back in the finals again. This time is taking on a rising prospect in Jenna Bishop. I simply think experience is experience, and this is Carmouche submission written all over it. What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree as well. This is going to be a really entertaining fight as well. I think it could definitely go either way. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Liz Carmouche to win this fight. It's definitely going to be close, but I think she'll get the win by decision.
Okay. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of the MMA Outsiders. This has been episode 124 of myself, Zain, Bando, and Anthony Balester. Before we get out of here, just wanted to do a few quick reminders. Of course, the MMA Outsiders and every single show on the ETB network is presented by Playback. As always, as you guys just heard a few minutes ago, of course, you can subscribe to the ETB network at youtube.com/ETB network. And of course, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe as the climb to 1,000 subscribers continues. And of course, before we get out of here, just as one more reminder for those of you who are on the video only side, please be sure to come back over to the audio side, and please remember to add the MMA Outsiders to your RSS feeds. We'll be back next week to recap UFC 319. It's going to be a little bit more of a later release, so stay tuned for more details on that. But until then, Anthony Balester, I'm Zain Bando. Thanks again for tuning in. Enjoy UFC 319 on Saturday and PFL on Friday. And until next week, we'll catch you guys soon. Have a good one. Thanks.